You guys are taking a snooze on my boy Apoc here. Hey guys, what's up? It's Katy and I'm back with another Marvel Contest of Champions video. And today we're going to be taking a look at Apocalypse. Now, I did some live testing of him and I gotta say, a lot of people were more interested in his synergies than Apocalypse himself. And I think that's pretty sad. I've seen it in a lot of line chats and Discord DMs, comments on videos that people think Apocalypse can't stand on his own. Well, I'm here to prove you wrong. So let's take a look at the pros and the cons of Apocalypse. So let's start out with the pros, shall we? And the big pro here is he is the damage over time mutant. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say king, but he is king for diss track. So if you have a problem with diss track and you've got Apocalypse on your hands, you really don't need to worry. So basically, how you place the debuffs with Apocalypse is with a heavy, you place a bleed, and those bleeds stack. So the more heavies you land, the more bleeds you're gonna place. So then what you want to do is you want to throw your special one. Now the special one, depending on what combo you do, you're either going to place a weakness or a poison debuff, or if you're facing a mutant, you're going to place both, or if you're ramped up and you throw your heavy and chain into the special, you're gonna place both. And then the special 2, he places a concussion and a degen. The heavy refreshes all of the debuffs, so you wanna keep that in mind when you're playing him. You always wanna be heavying, right, to keep those debuffs up. And then his special 3 makes the debuffs off of his specials permanent. So then there's no need to worry about refreshing, but keeping those bleeds on is super helpful because this damage, his damage all comes from his damage over time. It all comes from his debuffs. So speaking of damage, I know everyone is always so interested in those big yellow numbers. Well, Apocalypse doesn't necessarily give you those big yellow numbers. Yes, he has prowess. It's a passive prowess. When he has 4 persistent charges or 4 genetic enhancements, he has 4 passive prowess. But his damage all comes, like I said, from his DOTs. And you're not going to be looking for those big yellow numbers. You're going to be looking for those big red numbers. And those red numbers are going to stay consistent as long as you keep the debuffs on. So when he's ramped up, those big red numbers, they really start to come through. So it's not always about the big red numbers more, or the big yellow numbers more or less. It's sometimes more or less about the big red numbers. And that's what it is with Apocalypse. You're not gonna get the big yellow numbers that we're so accustomed to, but his damage over time is huge. And I think this is the main part that people are overlooking. Okay, now he also has some pretty cool utility, and that's with this total molecular control. So with the total molecular control, he develops immunity to bleed, incinerate, and disorient over 8 seconds while suffering from them, and that stays for the entire quest. So this makes him great for, you know, different nodes such as freezer burn, or it can make him really good for biohazard as long as you don't hit into their block, because he is not poison immune. So does that make him suicide friendly? Well, we'll get into that in a little bit. But also, opponents cannot purify any of his debuffs, making him great against champs like Mole Man, Killmonger, etc. And each time the opponent would evade, Apoc gains a chance to bypass the evade, and it continues throughout the quest, much like Corvus with the Proxima synergy. So that's kind of really neat. You don't need an extra synergy slot in order to have that on there. Now, another cool thing that I really like about Apocalypse is he doesn't need his Awakenability. And I know people are saying, but he's got that regen, it's gotta be worth awakening. And honestly, it's really not. He's great right out of the box. And honestly, any champ that is good right out of the box, I'm game for. Like, that is almost an instant A in my book. And also, everyone is always talking about Apocalypse's synergies. And let's face it, he really does have really good synergies. Now, He is good at boosting the mutants on your team because of the synergy that he has with himself, but he also has a synergy with Kang, Mr. Sinister, and Cable that really boosts him because that allows you to not have to ramp him up because he'll already technically end the first fight with 4 genetic codes, which is what you want to get the most out of Apocalypse. Now, the synergies for, well, his synergy members, such as Gambit, Storm Pyramid X, Psylocke, Wolverine, and Archangel are really good, as well as OG Storm, because they really help to boost them. And also, if you make one of these mutants a Horseman of Apocalypse, oh man, does it make them even more extra. So let's talk a little bit about this Horseman of Apocalypse, because this is what a lot of people are focusing on. And while it is a really nice concept, it's not all what Apocalypse is about. So this is his pre-fight crossfight ability that basically turns any mutant, well, extra, especially if said mutant already has a synergy with him, like Storm Pyramid X, OG Storm, Gambit, Psylocke, Wolvie, Archangel. Any one of those is going to become even more. I mean, my girl Storm P90X, she's nasty on her own, but when you make her a Horseman, oh boy, does that girl just shred. But also, this Horseman of Apocalypse can be applied to any mutant on the team. So what does that mean? That means champions like Domino, Havoc, they're really going to be boosted, and it gives them some utility too, right? Because that plus 100% bleed resistance gives them some utility and allows them to conquer fights that they may not normally be able to do. Okay, so now that we went over some of the pros, let's talk about some of the cons, because he does have some, and while they're there, they're honestly not that detrimental. So the first one is his regen. Now, I talked a little bit about this with his Awakenability, but it's the survival of the fittest. So basically, while he's quote unquote sleeping or not in a fight, Apocalypse will regen a portion of his health based on how many fights that he's quote unquote slept through. Now, he can do it for 2 fights, but I wish Kabam would have made it for up to 4 fights. If it was up to 4 fights, I feel like that would have been a really good boost in his health. While the 2 fights does give him a good bit of regen, it doesn't give him nearly as much as what maybe 4 fights would have, and that would have made him more sustainable than what he is with just this one. And another thing is Apocalypse is a ramp up champ. If you don't bring Cable, Kang, or Mr. Sinister on your team, it's going to take you 3 fights to ramp him up, unless you're coming up against a mutant, and then it'll only cost you 2 fights to ramp him up. So you kind of want to keep that in mind. But that being said, he can still do some pretty good damage when not completely ramped up. But when he is ramped up with the 4 genetic enhancements, that's when he really starts to shine. Now, I guess the silver lining to this, though, is that it does make Cable, Kang, and Mr. Sinister even better champions. And let's face it, Kang and Cable were kind of, well, Dudley, and Mr. Sinister was just kind of meh. So having him boost those makes it a lot better. Another con that I find is that, and this is a personal con for me, is that I find him to be clunky. He plays a lot like Sentinel, and to me it feels very like you're in slow motion with him. So that's just a personal con for me. I like the really smooth play styles of champions like Professor X and that sort of thing. So he's just a little clunky, but overall not terrible. Another thing is Apocalypse is not suicide friendly, and I know what you're thinking, but he has the regen. But honestly, the regen isn't that much, and he's not poison immune. If Kabam would have taken and replaced the disorient with a poison and had that immunity, I think that would have been better, because if you have the disorient on you and you run willpower, you'll heal up from it. So having him immune to disorient really isn't that necessary. Having him immune to poison, though, would have made him be able to handle a lot more pass and handle a lot more content. Not that he can't, but it would have just been a nice little bonus. And the big thing that Apocalypse suffers from is he is not great against debuff immune champs. If you go against a debuff immune, it's gonna be hard to get that damage in, because his damage is heavily reliant upon his damage over time debuffs. Now, he can do fairly well against robots because you can still place the weakness, concussion, and degen on. So you can still place those 3. So it'll still work for, you know, distract if you're facing a robot. He will have the class disadvantage though, so you kind of want to keep that in mind. And he also won't gain a genetic enhancement from because it's a hashtag robot champion. So, you need to kind of keep that in mind as well. But overall, like, he is still a solid champion. He can do a ton of damage over time. He's got some great synergies. I love his ability to stun into block when he's fully ramped up, because that can help him out, or help you out rather, on nodes like Oscillate when your opponent is just kind of turtling back in the corner, and give you a bit of an advantage. Also against champions like Mordo, who sit there in their power gain phase and just block and block and block, right? But you know, we all know how that goes. So with that being said, how would I rate Apocalypse? Well, he's not like a crazy god tier champion. Not that I find really any champion to be god tier, but that was a different video. But I do find him to be useful, and I do find him fun to play. I think he's got some uses. I like his damage over time. I think it is there. I don't really know what you guys are thinking. So overall, I would give Apocalypse 7.5 out of 10 candies. He's not ecstatically great, but he is still good, and he is above par. So that is where I would fit him in the mutant class. And the mutant class is tough too, because there are a lot of bangers in that class. But anyways, guys, that's all that I got. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Apocalypse now? Do you think he is still not what he should be? Are you still sleeping on him? Or do you think I am crazy for rating him where I do? Do you think I am just seeing something that you guys are not? Or am I just, well, out of my mind? Let me know in the comments below, and let's discuss. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you guys liked what you saw and you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and hit me up in the Discord chat. Thanks, guys. Bye.